Hi, welcome to What the Flick. My name is Christy, that is Alonzo, that is Bibbs, and we're going to talk about this little bitty indie called Rogue One: a Star Wars story between episodes 3 and 4. In case you're wondering what happens then, we now know. Tell us.
Star Wars, those crazy Star Wars. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. You know, at the beginning of A New Hope, when Princess Leia is absconding with the Death Star plans, this is how they got the Death Star plans. Let's take a look.
The world is coming undone. Imperial flags reign across the galaxy.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We've a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
If you're really doing this, I want to help.
So this is our non-spoiler review, just so we're clear. There's a whole separate one where we give away
We know it's about stealing the Death Star plans, and we've seen A New Hope, so we do know that at some point Leia gets them. Other than that, nothing happened in this movie. We're not going to tell you a thing.
Right. All right. So, I mean, it's weird with the what constitutes a spoiler to the people who are super excited about Star Wars. I don't even know half the time. Like last year, I think I mentioned General Leia, and people were like, "What? No!" You know. So, what can we talk about?
We can talk about the way it's shot.
It stars Felicity Jones. She's on the poster. You know that.
Okay. This is directed by Gareth Edwards, who also did Godzilla and Monsters. And he films Rogue One, a Star Wars story, like no other Star Wars movie before it. I think it's fair to say. He films it more like a contemporary war movie with that kind of color palette and that kind of editing. It's a different look for Star Wars, and it befits this film because this film is kind of at its core a men on a mission movie in the vein of Guns of Navarone or Dirty Dozen, at least in its construct. Whether or not it's as effective of that, I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I mean, structurally, absolutely, it fits into that category. I think what I find so lacking in this movie is that even at the level of a war movie or a Star Wars movie, frankly, I feel like we usually get characters that have a little more going on, that we have a little more investment in. This one, I felt like there's a lot of stuff being thrown at us and a lot of names, but I didn't know who they were. For example, the Felicity Jones character at the beginning of the movie is in an imperial prison, and the rebels spring her. But
This
it's
is
like
the first scene we see her as an adult, not a spoiler.
Yeah, this is early on in the movie, and it's like, okay, wait, is she in an imperial prison because she's a criminal? Is she in the imperial prison because she's a rebel, like activist, rabble rouser? Like, we don't know. They never talk about that. And I would, knowing her level of involvement with the rebellion up until that point would tell us something. The Diego Luna character does something rather shocking the first time we meet him, but then we never find out, is that typical of his character? Is he just doing the job?
The implication is that he's the type of character in the Star Wars universe who's had to do some difficult things for the rebellion, and his one character trait, and you'll notice that pretty much the entire cast has one character trait. There's his one character trait is he's got a pass, he's not terribly proud of it, but he was doing it for the right reasons. The robot, played by, the droid, played by Alan Tudyk, its one character trait is it's very candid.
And he's the best character in the movie.
But he's very vague. What is he? Like, C-3PO was well defined. He was callow, so putting him in an adventurous situation was always interesting. Alan Tudyk's character just sort of mouths off a lot. It's not as interesting. Donnie Yen is a blind, force-sensitive
He's also cool.
warrior, but his whole thing is he's blind, but he's a total badass. What else has he got? Literally nothing. It's a bunch of interesting ideas for characters, but they don't transcend their pulpy origins the way the original Star Wars movies do. So they're entertaining, but you're right, I don't feel anything for them.
I mean, I think the new characters in Force Awakens felt more defined by the middle of the movie, much less by the end, than any of these cats.
Yeah, because they're allowed to talk to each other.
I liked it visually quite a bit, and I like the sort of effortless multiculturalism that exists here in a way that I don't think we have seen in previous Star Wars movies. But I agree with you, having said that it's such a great cast, they really are all poorly defined. And I love the idea of, in the vein of Rey, in the vein of Leia, we have this badass woman at the center here who is unflappable and unstoppable, but also theoretically should have shading to her beyond that, right? There should be some kind of more complexity to her inner life that I don't think we see. My interpretation of why she is in jail is that she's just sort of been functioning on her own. I mean, for so long, I didn't interpret it as her being part of the rebellion and doing bad things as part of the rebellion. I looked at it as like she's gone rogue on her own before she becomes part of Rogue One.
No, I didn't know. Like, literally,
They're really not specific is the
30
issue.
seconds of like, oh, she's a pickpocket because she lives by her wits or something. Fine, whatever. That's something. You know, something,
Breaking
anything.
a song to explain us who you are.
Yes,
But it's in a tough spot, this movie, because it has to be connective tissue between 3 and 4, but it also has to theoretically stand on its own. I'm not sure that you can see this without having had some knowledge of the Star Wars world, and so it can't stand on its own entirely.
What bugs me about this movie is that A, I was bored stiff for a great deal of it. I really was, and I am generally fairly kind, I think, to the Star Wars franchise. I even think that Episode 3 is not the worst thing ever.
I liked Episode 3.
Episode 3 is not the worst thing ever.
And so, but I just,
1's the worst thing ever.
yes,
I would
no
say
question.
2 is the worst thing.
Okay.
Actually, no, the holiday special is the worst
Well,
thing ever.
well, okay, that's a
We
whole
can all
other
agree
level.
on that,
Yes,
right?
no
There are bad
question.
Okay,
things.
all right.
Anyway, I was not getting into this at all, and plus the fact it felt to me that it was just loaded with these little Easter eggs for hardcore Star Wars fans, and I've heard reports from several different screenings now where there's like this one contingent of people who are like, woo! And it's just like, it's this movie that is designed for fans to be self-congratulatory that they know what Yavin 4 is or whatever.
And look, sometimes these things are organically included. Yavin 4 was the location of the Rebel base in A New Hope. That's kind of important. That's actually like, there's a reason to see that in this story. There's a lot of, and we'll talk about this in maybe the spoiler section, I'm not going to go into specifics, there's a lot of shout outs to previous films or whatever, and a lot of them are just there to be there.
Yeah.
A lot of them. Like there's one, in fact, there's even like a couple of things like they're on this one planet, you see a character that doesn't make any sense that they're there.
No.
Like, it's really weird.
And I'm not immune to the treat of, I get that thing that you're referring to.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw the Doctor Strange movie this year and you see that window in the Greenwich Village house, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. It's the window for the Greenwich Village house. Yes, fine, but that's not all what the movie is. And this to me just felt like this barrage of little hints and shout outs and aren't you clever for getting this? In place of a story that I was not getting. And so this was one of my least favorite Star Wars experiences.
It drags a bit in the middle. I will agree with you on that. I will admit it's a little dozy in the middle.
And I think and people are raving about the Act 3 action sequence. And
that was badass.
It's
cool badass stuff in that.
Fine.
No, the dogfight in Act 3 is gnarly. I love the way it's shot. There's a tactile nature to it. And then there's one image I love of when Ben Mendelsohn goes to see Darth Vader. Okay, and that's not a spoiler. You know Darth Vader's in this.
That's in the trailer.
Yeah, don't even. But there's a beautiful shot where you see it from. There's like a door that goes up, and you see the shadow of Darth Vader. So stuff like that. Like, I feel like there's care taken with the look of this, and maybe not with the character development.
I have serious issues with that scene, but we'll talk about that in the spoiler section.
But it's cool looking.
It's cool looking. I'm not going to argue that. There's cool looking stuff in it. But you know, this film takes place between episodes 3 and 4. It's filling in a blank, and yet the film itself feels kind of like a Mad Libs. We know what has to happen at certain points in this, at least in a general sort of way. And the film just sort of kind of bides its time getting to each one, and it feels kind of perfunctory. This film, more than a lot of other Star Wars stories, hell, even the prequels, really does feel like it's driven by plot and not character.
Yeah.
And no, that sounds like a film critic snobby thing to say, I like my films when they're driven by character. But when you're doing a story that's about an important thing, we got to get these Death Star plans. It's a MacGuffin, but what are you going to do? It's a cool thing. We have to know what's going on and why we should care.
Right.
And when the characters are very thin and they're just sort of like half the characters who join them, or maybe not half, a third of the characters who join the mission over time, I honestly don't know why they hang around. There's literally no reason why like 2 of those characters would even decide to be there.
They have
for,
no
like,
place else to go.
They have no
They've got no place else to
So
go.
I'm just going to risk my life for people I don't know. They haven't talked to them, we haven't befriended them. We don't know how they feel about what they're doing.
It gives them purpose eventually. That's my guess.
And it's worth pointing out, you can make an exciting, suspenseful movie that you know how it ends. You know, I always point to Apollo 13.
United 93.
United 93, 1776. There's plenty of them where, like, you know how it's going to end, but the getting there is what's fascinating. So it's not that we know that Princess Leia winds up with the Death Star plans that makes this movie not interesting. What makes this movie not interesting is that it's not very well written and the characters aren't interesting. And you're right, it's more about the stuff involved to get to the place and grab the thing and take it to the other place than it is about the people who do it. And usually in these movies, I think we are more invested in the people who do it.
That being said, and I do want to make this clear, I did enjoy myself.
Okay.
It's a problem. It's a problem movie because there's a lot of cool stuff in it. There's a lot of stuff I really like. It's certainly watchable and entertaining. I had a good time watching most of it. We'll talk about some of the other stuff in the spoiler section. It averages out to an enjoyable time in the movies, but this is like a 3-star shallow action movie, and we kind of expect and want more from Star Wars. You have a good time, but it feels like the emotionally resonant stuff is just hearkening back. Like, when I started getting emotionally invested was as the film got closer and closer to the events of Star Wars Episode 4, because that I already knew about.
Right.
That I already cared about. These characters, the movie wants us to care, and they'll shove the biggest possible plot bullet points. Not actual plot, but the bullet points that it possibly can to get you to care. We're going to do this thing. Why? Screenwriting 101 says that'll make you like the character. This Screenwriting 101 says this sacrifice will mean something to you. It doesn't, because I don't care. But I was superficially entertained.
It is Muppet Babies. It is, one day Kermit and Miss Piggy will do this, this, and this, so we're going to make a sketchy reference to it now because, it's funny because you know what happens later.
Except the Muppet Babies already did Star Wars.
That's true.
Yeah, good episode.
What don't you know, Bibbs?
Nothing.
Having said
I'm the
that,
beast.
there's a certain momentum in that last act to how is this piece going to fall into this piece, and then it's going to get us to where we know we need to be in the beginning of Star Wars. Like, that's exciting. Like, and we're going to talk about that more in the spoiler section. Like, how they get there is as exciting almost as like the end of Revenge of the Sith, when you know the helmet's going to come down, he's going to take that breath. Like, I know it's fan service, whatever, but it's cool to see those pieces fall into place.
I would say it's even cooler. There's one bit, won't say what it is, but there's one bit, it seems like fan service, comes right near the end. That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in any Star Wars movie.
We'll talk about it.
It's ridiculous. That's the thing. The highlights in this movie. There's cool scenes. There's funny scenes. There's great lines of dialogue. But they're just sort of tied together in just this sort of bland construct.
And weirdly enough, this is kind of the problem that I had with Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, which was, okay, if you're going to make us wait for all the really tasty Godzilla stuff until Act 3, because that's how the old movies did it, or however, whatever your reasoning is, then you better fill in Acts 1 and 2 with something else, so some people or some activity or something that I'm remotely interested in. And he didn't do it there, and he doesn't do it here.
Okay, well then let's stop there. We have a lot more we want to talk about. What is your number?
I give it a 5. I mean, it is solidly put together. It is a Star Wars movie, but a not very interesting one for me anyway.
6. You
Okay.
liked it a lot more.
I like that. Listen, I recommend seeing this movie. It's a good time at the theater. If you're a Star Wars fan, there's a lot of cool stuff in it. But this is like the 5th best Star Wars movie. Like, that's pretty good. That's not great.
Okay, what's your number then?
7.5.
Okay, so our number is a 6.2, I think.
We're film critics because we're
yes,
great at math.
yes.
All right, and it is at 84%. It's amazing how all over the board people's responses to this are. People we love dearly, Tim Grierson, Jen Yamato, are like, it's the best Star Wars movie since Empire Strikes Back.
It's the one I've been waiting for my entire adult life.
Oh,
I'm
I was waiting
wow,
for a really good one.
I would like to
Love
see
this
that movie, please.
Yeah.
We'll get into more in our separate, super sexy spoiler edition.
Oh, is it going to get sexy? Excuse me one second.
Bye.